so I'm KMG. I'm a Scottish-based artist. I specialise in murals and street art.
So we're in Nuart Aberdeen, outside Aberdeen Airport. So tell me what you're painting.
So this is actually quite a special commission because normally Aberdeen, Nuart Aberdeen only happens in the city centre, but the airport were really kind of desperate to get some artwork on their walls. So we decided it'd be quite a nice fit to have a Scottish artist and an Aberdonian artist come and create some artwork here for guests that are arriving and leaving. So we decided to do artwork based on characters within Celtic mythology and folklore. So I'm kind of using them to welcome guests and locals to the airport, but also as kind of gatekeepers to Scotland. So when people arrive, they're here to protect the land and welcome people, but almost with a slightly kind of watchful eye, I guess.
So there's an element of the guardians of Aberdeen, or the protecting travellers, but also protecting Aberdeen too?
Yeah, I guess, the gateway to Scotland. I guess you can see that Aberdeen is one of the main gateways. Well, I mean, there's more airports than the Highlands now, but at one point Aberdeen was your main kind of international access to the Highlands and Islands as well, where a lot of these characters kind of originate from. It's, pagan, Celtic and Norse folklore. So as a sense, kind of custodians of the land. So inviting people to enjoy Scotland, but also respect it too and respect its cultures.
So what's the piece behind you?
So this is Brigid. So Brigid is the goddess of spring, health, fertility. She's associated quite heavily with Scotland in particular because Brigid, or Scathach as she's also known, is a goddess of winter. And she lived in Scotland, and Brigid was in a relationship with Scathach's son, and Scathach didn't like this. So she captured her and kept her hostage. And then Scathach's son would recapture her every springtime, and that would be the end of winter and the start of spring. So she's quite a well-known character within Celtic culture, both in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. So she's quite an important role. Yeah.
And the way you pronounced it, because to read it, it's Brigid.
Yeah.
But you say Brigid. So is that like a different translation that's common around here? Or?
It just depends where about you're from. In Northern Ireland or Scotland, it's a Gaelic kind of name, so it can be read as Brigid or Brigid or Brigid. It just really depends what you've grown up with.
So that's one of a number of murals that you're painting around the airport, around the car park area of the airport, actually.
Yeah.
So tell me about the others.
So we've got, on the other side, eventually we'll be doing Brigid, or Scathach, who's the goddess of winter. We can't at the moment, but we're hopefully going to get her done. We've got Scathach. So Scathach wasn't a goddess, but she trained the Celtic gods in battle and war and the protection of their own land. So quite an important character within Celtic mythology. And at the back, we've got Cernunnos. So Cernunnos is quite a divisive character. A lot of people argue his name sounds Latin or Roman, so they argue that when the Roman came and built the Antonine Wall, that's the introduction of Cernunnos. But there are elements within Pictish and Norse kind of history. We've seen carvings of a man with a stag's head, which is what Cernunnos was known to have taken the shape of. So there's some arguments between historians within folklore whether Cernunnos is a Celtic kind of character or whether it was a Roman character that was brought across and then adopted. But I find that quite interesting about oral stories and how they kind of do develop and become part of our own histories.
So in terms of the style that you're painting, very clean lines, very stylised works, how has that style evolved for you? Because when I first came across your work, it was very much character-based and it's your unique characters as well. So how's that developed over the years? Yeah,
so my work's always been quite character-based. When I started doing street art and graffiti, I actually did more kind of traditional, I guess, NY style characters with those heavy kind of more black outlines, a bit more caricature-y. And it's kind of developed over the years to be more and more simplistic. I kind of like boiling things down to the bare minimum because I find that more of a challenge. I feel like it's harder to do more with less than it is to do less with more. So I like that challenge. It's quite hard to make something look good that's so minimal. There's nothing to hide behind. You can't hide behind any shading or, lots of kind of features. So I really kind of enjoy the balance of creating like a tidy composition and using those clean lines to achieve that.
So what was your background going into this, the street art and graffiti world, how did you navigate your way to be where you are?
So I started doing street art and graffiti when I was about 16 in Aberdeen. I actually started off doing little stencils, which I was terrible at, and anti-BNP stickers. So I grew up, 9/11 happened when I was 16. The Islamophobia in the UK was at an all-time high, and the BNP and all these kind of EDL parties were coming to Aberdeen and having these awful protests. So I actually started making stickers to protest fascism and racism and to show solidarity with Muslim communities. And so I guess my introduction to street art and graffiti came from a place of activism. And that still kind of is to this day, although these artworks are pleasant to look at, there's still an element of activism there and defending Scottish culture and heritage. All these characters, they were, when Christianity arrived in Scotland and colonialism arrived, they tried to eradicate these cultures. So it's me trying to reclaim them and bring them back. So in a sense, another form of activism.
Is this activism route then, is that common within the pieces that you might not do in Aberdeen but also elsewhere? Because I've seen the heavy folklore.
I take in particular, I find folklore and mythology really quite interesting. I think that stemmed from, I was reading a book not that long ago. I was researching the Highland clearances and I've always been interested in kind of the history of and the heritage of our cultures. And I read this interesting quote that basically suggested that unless it was written down by an academic or a scholar, it couldn't be trusted. And the history of folklore and mythologies and our heritage and cultures, especially in the Highlands of Scotland, a lot of people couldn't read or write. So they passed down oral stories, or they passed down songs, or they passed down art. And that's what seeped into our culture, and that is what a lot of us identify with to this kind of present day. So I find that really interesting. When I travel to new places, I try and find out a bit about the kind of unspoken or forgotten stories that have been kind of washed out by contemporary culture, and try and bring them back to light and try and kind of connect the past with present day.
And with that, generally, all those stories, so there's always a connection to the area that you're painting.
Yeah.
So what's the reaction that you would get then if you're bringing these stories back to life in many ways? When you talk about these and when you explain this to local populations, what's the reaction that you get to that?
It's normally quite positive. I think actually most people will generally have heard, especially the older generations, people my parents' age, 60 plus, a lot of them will have heard these stories when they were young, when they were told them. It's more the younger generations that seem to not really be reading about it. I think the internet has now caused a massive shift in how we learn and engage with each other. So you don't have that same culture of bedtime stories that we kind of grew up with. You weren't just sitting on your phones, you were like telling stories to each other. And learning and having fun that way. Everything's been replaced by tablets, phones. It is a different culture now. So I think most people are quite interested to learn a bit about their own heritage and cultures. Yeah.
In many ways, it seems like then. I mean, you're right. The oral history of the British Isles, in particular, has been forever, really. And you get this idea of telling tales around the campfire, and that's how the traditions kept going, isn't it? That's how you remember. This oral memory is really important. Is that how you grew up then? Is that always something you've been fascinated by? Have you always been enjoying these sort of tales around the campfire type?
Yeah, so in particular, I had a really close relationship with my mum's side of the family, who were based in the Highlands. And we'd often go for walks in the woods, and my granny and granddad would tell us stories, of the characters that lived in the woods, predominantly trolls. That's obviously coming from the Norse influence in the Highlands and Islands. But yeah, they often told us, like I spend my summers there, the stories of the land and the importance of respecting the land and the creatures within the land. It was a heavy thread for me growing up. And I guess you get to a point where you forget about it, and now at an age where I have my own son, that's when I started really considering it a bit more, and you start considering your own identity as well and your own place within your own land. And the older you get, I think you start reflecting on that more. So that's kind of what's triggered it, I guess, really, yeah.
So you mentioned, you obviously from the Highlands, you're from this area, you've lived in Aberdeen, and you started painting Aberdeen as a young'un.
Yeah.
And now you're back here. How's it changed? How's the art scene changed?
I mean, the art scene has changed. I say it every time. You cannot underestimate how dramatically the art scene has changed. I think it's easy for people to come here now and think that art's always been welcomed in Aberdeen. That's very much not the case. Only 10 years ago, artists were made to feel very unwelcome. They've cancelled plans for an art centre, that was going to break ground. The private sector ruled all, and artists were kind of, treated as kind of underdogs. Especially in street art and graffiti, the local council and the police just had a zero tolerance policy. So it's actually the hard workings of people like Peacocks and Smart and Nuart. Nuart's had such a drastic impact on Aberdeen city centre with all the murals, and I think that's been one of a large part of change. It's come from Nuart, it's come from Smart, it's come from Peacocks, and just like people being stubborn and saying we're not going anywhere, and actually showing people that art can actually have quite a positive change on a city.
So I've heard about Nuart, but Smart and Peacocks?
So Peacocks Visual Arts, our local kind of contemporary art centre, they've got a print studio, they do a lot of community engagement, they do a lot of exhibitions. Smart are a consultancy agency, they put on festivals and pop-up kind of creative events as well, so they're quite supportive of the creative community in Aberdeen as well.
So when people come to Aberdeen and they see your work and they interact with your work, what do you hope they'll experience?
I hope they enjoy it. I think there's a lot of pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself as an Aberdonian to make the Aberdonians proud and want to see the artwork here. I think it's different coming in as an outsider, I guess, and making art as a gift. When you're from here, you really kind of want to do it justice and give them something back, I guess. So I put that pressure on myself a bit. Yeah, you're never going to make everyone happy. I think the last mural I did in Aberdeen, somebody said it was repulsive, which actually gave me a bit of a laugh. I took a screenshot of it, and I do look at it quite often and I laugh. But I mean, if everybody likes what you're doing something wrong. As long as it's creating conversations and it's engaging people and it gets them having conversations, talking to each other, that's the job done as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
KMG, thank you.
You're very welcome.